The first gunshot shattered the diner window before anyone even realized the argument had turned deadly. Glass burst inward across the counter, spraying coffee and sugar packets over the floor, and the waitress named Lila ducked so fast she knocked a tray of bacon and eggs onto a construction worker's lap. A second shot followed, louder, echoing off the chrome stools and linoleum like a thunderclap inside a steel drum. The man holding the revolver stood near booth 7, breathing hard, his arms shaking. The gun pointed toward another man sprawled half out of the booth with blood spreading across his flannel shirt. Nobody moved. The whole diner seemed to freeze except for the old ceiling fan slowly clicking above the counter. The smell of gunpowder mixed with burnt coffee. Sheriff Daniel Mercer had just been taking a sip when the first shot fired. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the tile as he stared at the man holding the gun. "Evan," Mercer said quietly, disbelief cracking his voice. "What the hell did you just do?" Evan Caldwell looked barely 23, pale, trembling, grease from the mechanic shop still on his hands. He stared down at the body in the booth as if he couldn't recognize what he'd done. "He said my sister deserved it," Evan whispered. Nobody in the diner understood the sentence yet, but they could feel the weight behind it. The man bleeding in the booth was named Troy Bennett, a real estate developer who had arrived in Pine Ridge 6 months earlier, promising investment, jobs, new construction. Now his head hung sideways against the vinyl seat, blood dripping onto the floor in slow, steady drops. Someone in the back booth began crying. Sheriff Mercer stood slowly, raising both hands. "Evan, put the gun down." Outside the diner, a pickup truck roared past on Highway 28. Inside, every breath felt louder than the last. Evan's eyes flicked around the room like a trapped animal. "He hurt her," Evan said again, louder this time, desperation creeping into the words. "He hurt my sister." Mercer moved one careful step forward. "We'll talk about it. Just lower the gun." But Evan's eyes were already drifting back toward the door like he was calculating escape. The deputy's cruiser sat outside, lights off, parked crooked in the gravel lot. Mercer knew the kid saw it too. Another second passed, stretched thin with tension. Then Evan ran. He bolted toward the door, knocking over a chair, shoving past a stunned trucker near the entrance. Mercer lunged after him, but slipped on broken glass. By the time he reached the doorway, Evan's pickup engine had already roared to life. Tires screamed against gravel as the truck fishtailed onto the highway and disappeared into the morning fog rolling off the farmland. Mercer stood in the doorway breathing hard while the sound of the truck faded. Behind him someone shouted, "Call an ambulance." Another voice cried, "He's still breathing." Mercer turned back toward the diner. Troy Bennett lay half-conscious, gasping wetly as blood bubbled from the wound near his collarbone. Mercer knelt beside him, pressing a napkin against the bleeding even though he knew it wouldn't help much. Troy's eyes rolled weakly toward him. "Sheriff," Troy rasped. You don't know what you're dealing with." Mercer frowned. "Save your strength." But Troy shook his head faintly. "The land," he whispered. "It's not what they think." Then his eyes drifted closed. Sirens began echoing faintly in the distance. Mercer leaned back slowly, staring at the spreading blood. Something about that last sentence crawled under his skin. The land. Outside, the fog thickened across the fields. Pine Ridge had been a quiet farming town for generations. The kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked, and everybody knew everybody's truck. But Mercer felt something shift that morning, like a fault line cracking under the surface. Across town, 17-year-old Emily Caldwell woke up in her bedroom to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. She rolled over groggy, hair tangled, and answered without checking the screen. "Hello." The voice on the other end belonged to her friend Mia from school. It sounded breathless, panicked. "Emily, turn on the TV, right now." Emily sat up slowly. "Why?" There was a long pause before Mia spoke again. "Your brother just shot someone." The words didn't make sense. Emily blinked. "What?" "It's on Channel 5, Mia said. "The diner on Highway 28. They said his name." Emily scrambled for the remote and turned on the small TV sitting on her dresser. The local news station had already cut to a shaky live report outside Rosie's diner. Yellow police tape fluttered in the wind. Sheriff Mercer stood in the background speaking to paramedics. The reporter's voice came through the speakers, tense and excited. Suspect identified as Evan Caldwell, local mechanic, fled the scene moments after the shooting. Emily dropped the remote. Her heart began hammering so violently it hurt. "No," she whispered. Her eyes filled with tears even before she understood why. Because deep down she already knew what Troy Bennett had done. She had been trying not to tell anyone, especially Evan. At the Pine Ridge County Hospital, Troy Bennett was rushed through the emergency doors 20 minutes later. Nurses shouted instructions, while doctors cut open his blood-soaked shirt. One of them leaned close to the wound and frowned. "Entry wound only," the doctor said. "Bullet still inside." Troy's pulse flickered weakly on the monitor. As they worked, the doctor asked the obvious question. "What happened?" The paramedic answered. "Kid shot him at a diner, said something about his sister." The doctor glanced briefly at Troy's pale face before returning to the surgery. Outside the hospital, Sheriff Mercer sat in his cruiser, staring at the steering wheel. Deputy Carla Ruiz leaned through the open window. "We've got patrols checking every back road," she said. Mercer nodded absently. His mind kept replaying Troy's last words. "The land." Ruiz studied his expression. "You okay?" Mercer exhaled slowly. "Something about this doesn't sit right." "Guy got shot," Ruiz said. "Kid ran. Seems pretty straightforward." Mercer shook his head faintly. "You ever notice how many outsiders suddenly want land in Pine Ridge lately?" Ruiz shrugged. "Developers. Happens everywhere." Mercer rubbed his temple. "Yeah, but Bennett wasn't just buying property. He was buying specific property." Ruiz raised an eyebrow. "What kind?" Mercer stared out toward the distant farmland stretching beyond town. "The Caldwell land." Ruiz went quiet. Everyone in Pine Ridge knew the Caldwell farm. It had been in their family for nearly a century. Hundreds of acres of rolling fields, old barns, oak trees older than the town itself. Valuable land, but the Caldwells had never shown interest in selling. "You think this shooting has something to do with that?" Ruiz asked carefully. Mercer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched a flock of crows lift from a distant field like black smoke rising into the sky. "I think," Mercer said slowly, "we're missing something big." Meanwhile, Evan Caldwell drove his pickup like a man being chased by ghosts. The highway blurred past while his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind replayed Troy Bennett's words over and over again. "Your sister came to my office begging for help." Evan slammed his fist against the dashboard. "Shut up," he muttered, as if Troy were still sitting beside him. But the memory kept coming back. The smirk. The way Troy leaned back in the diner booth like he owned the town already. "You should have seen how desperate she looked," Troy had said. Evan's vision blurred with rage again just remembering it. He swerved onto a dirt road leading toward the Caldwell farm. The pickup bounced violently over ruts. When the old farmhouse finally appeared through the trees, Evan slammed the brakes and jumped out before the truck even stopped fully. Emily stood on the porch, waiting. She had been watching the road ever since the news broadcast ended. Her eyes were red from crying. Evan froze when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the tall grass around the property. Finally, Emily said softly, "You shot him." Evan swallowed hard. "He hurt you." Emily shook her head violently. "You don't understand." Evan's anger flared again. "Then explain it." Emily stepped down from the porch slowly, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold even in the warm morning air. "I went to see him," she admitted. "But he didn't hurt me." Evan blinked, confused. "That's not what he said." Emily looked away toward the field stretching behind the barn. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He said he could prove something about our land." Evan frowned. "What kind of thing?" Emily hesitated. "Something buried under it." Evan stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Emily." She shook her head again. "I thought it was just some scam at first. But then he showed me documents." "What documents?" Emily looked back at him, fear now filling her eyes. "Government ones." Evan felt a chill creep up his spine despite the sun rising over the farmland. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily's voice broke. "Because the last page had your name on it." Evan's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Emily took a slow breath. "Evan, whatever's under our land, the government thinks you already know about it." Evan felt the ground tilt slightly beneath his feet, because he had never told Emily about the night, 3 months earlier when he found something buried deep in the north field. Something metallic, something that definitely didn't belong in the soil of a farm that had been there since 1924, and something that had been quietly humming when he touched it. Far down the highway, Sheriff Mercer's cruiser pulled onto the dirt road leading toward the Caldwell farm. Mercer killed the engine but stayed inside the cruiser for a moment, watching Evan and Emily through the windshield, brother and sister standing 10 feet apart in the yellow morning light like survivors of different disasters, and he felt the same uneasy pressure in his chest he used to feel before serving a warrant on a family that still thought they could talk their way out of grief. Then he stepped out, left the door open, and rested one hand near his holster without drawing. "Evan," he called. "Don't make this worse." Evan turned slowly, his face drawn and gray. The fury from the diner still there but fraying now under shock and confusion. You already know where this ends, Evan said. Mercer kept walking until he reached the gate near the front yard. Maybe. But I'd rather hear your side before the county hears theirs. Emily looked from one man to the other. Sheriff, he didn't mean to kill him. Mercer's eyes stayed on Evan. He's not dead yet. Evan let out a raw laugh that had no humor in it. That's supposed to make me feel better? Mercer glanced at Emily. Go inside. No, she said immediately. Whatever this is, I'm done being sent inside. The words landed harder than she expected. Evan looked at her, startled, because Emily had always been the one who left the room when voices got loud, the one who pretended conflict was weather, and all you could do was wait it out. Mercer noticed it too. He nodded once, almost respectfully. Then stay, but listen more than you speak. The wind pushed across the field, flattening the tops of the tall grass behind the barn. Mercer took off his hat and held it at his side. Troy Bennett said something before the ambulance took him, said the land isn't what people think. Evan and Emily exchanged a look, small and quick, but Mercer caught it. So he wasn't lying, Mercer said. Evan's shoulders tensed. He showed Emily papers. What papers? I haven't seen them. Mercer looked to Emily, and she hesitated long enough to tell him that what she knew scared her more than her brother with a gun. He had copies, she said quietly. Maps, survey reports, letters with federal seals on them. I didn't understand half of it, but there were references to a restricted materials recovery site. Mercer frowned. Recovery of what? Emily swallowed. That's the part he wouldn't say unless we agreed to sell. Evan stepped in, anger rising again. He was blackmailing us. He was leveraging, Mercer said. That's a different sin. Evan took a step toward him. You really gonna split hairs after what he said in that diner? Mercer's gaze sharpened. What exactly did he say? Evan opened his mouth, then stopped. The memory came back with humiliating force. Troy, smiling through coffee steam, enjoying it, using Emily like a match to reach a dry field. He said she came to him begging, Evan said. He made it sound like he couldn't finish. Emily closed her eyes a moment. He wanted you mad, she said. He got what he wanted. Mercer studied them both, then looked beyond the house toward the north field. 3 months ago, I got a call from a state environmental office asking whether the Caldwell property had experienced any unauthorized excavation. They were vague. Too vague. I asked why, and they shut down on me. 2 days later, Bennett showed up in town. Evan felt cold move down his back. You think they were connected? I think men like Bennett don't buy farmland because they love sunflowers, Mercer said. What'd you find out there, Evan? The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Emily slowly turned to her brother. You did find something. Evan stared at the dirt near his boots. For weeks, he had kept the memory boxed up in a part of himself he didn't examine. Not because he didn't remember it, but because remembering it made the world feel less stable. He had been repairing a fence line after dark, using the tractor lights because the next day's rain would turn the north field to sludge. One rear tire had sunk into a soft patch, and when he climbed down with a shovel, he hit metal less than a foot under the soil. Not rusted farm junk. Smooth, cold, too perfect. He had dug a little farther and uncovered a curved surface that gave off a low vibration, almost below hearing. It had a seam but no visible bolts, no markings except a faint row of stamped numbers that did not match any serial format he knew. When he laid his palm against it, the hum deepened and a pulse of heat shot up his arm so hard he dropped backward into the dirt. The next morning, the thing was gone. The ground looked tamped flat, fresh as if a crew had come in the night and erased it. He had convinced himself exhaustion had distorted the memory, except his right hand had tingled for 2 days, and the stamped numbers had stayed in his head like a tune he hated. Now he raised his eyes. I found something buried, he said. Emily stared. Mercer did not move. How big? Bigger than a tractor hood. Maybe 6 feet across. Curved. Metal, I think. You told nobody? Mercer asked. Who was I going to tell? Hey, Sheriff, I touched a UFO in the North Field? Mercer's expression didn't change. Try me. Emily let out a shaky breath. The papers Troy showed me had a code on one page. R914C. Evan's head snapped toward her. That was on it. Mercer's face hardened in a way neither of them had seen before. You're sure? Yeah. Damn it, Mercer muttered. He put his hat back on and looked toward the road, thinking fast. Evan heard a different tone in him now, less lawman than witness. What does it mean? Mercer hesitated, and for the first time since arriving, he looked older than his 52 years. My father was sheriff before me, he said. Before that, he was military police at Fort Dalton in the late 70s. He got drunk one winter when I was 16 and said there'd been a transport accident outside Pine Ridge in 1979. Something moved under federal guard, no local paperwork, no state oversight. A truck jackknifed in an ice storm near Miller's Creek. He said the cargo team took 12 hours to recover whatever it was. Afterward, men in suits leaned on everyone involved. My father signed non-disclosure papers he claimed had no agency name on them. He told me one thing before he died. If anybody starts buying the Caldwell land, it means something got left behind. Emily felt her knees weaken. She sat on the porch step without meaning to. Evan stared at Mercer. Why didn't you say this before? Mercer gave him a tired look. Because it sounded like dying man folklore, and because sheriffs who start talking about secret cargo under family farms don't keep getting elected. The three of them stood in the uneasy quiet of shared knowledge just long enough for a black SUV to appear at the end of the dirt road. It rolled toward the house without hurry, polished and clean in a town made of dust. A second SUV followed behind it. Mercer muttered a curse. Inside, both of you. Evan didn't move. Who are they? Not county. Mercer stepped back toward the cruiser. That's enough for me. The first SUV stopped by the gate. 2 men and 1 woman got out, all in plain dark clothes that managed to look official without saying where they worked. The woman was in her 40s, silver streak and black hair, mirrored sunglasses despite the weak morning sun. She walked ahead of the others with the confidence of somebody accustomed to entering private property and renaming it procedure. Sheriff Mercer, she said, flashing an ID too quickly to read. Special Agent Lena Voss, we need to speak with the Caldwell family. Mercer didn't glance at the badge. Then you can make an appointment. One of the men, thick-necked and broad in the shoulders, moved a half-step forward. Voss lifted a hand and he stopped. She focused on Evan. Mr. Caldwell, you are in possession of sensitive federal information. Evan barked a laugh. You mean my own dirt? I mean material relating to an incident under national protection statutes. That's supposed to mean something to normal people? Emily asked. Voss turned to her. Miss Caldwell, I'm trying to avoid a situation. Emily stood. That ship sailed when you people started threatening my family through a land developer. Voss's face stayed composed, but one lens of the sunglasses tilted enough to show she was reassessing Emily as a problem rather than a witness. Mr. Bennett was a civilian intermediary. His methods were not ours, Mercer said. Convenient. Voss ignored him. We need any documents, mister. Bennett may have shown you, and we need to know whether anything was removed from the site. Evan stepped toward the fence line. Removed by me? No. Removed by whoever came in the middle of the night? Probably. Voss held out her hand. Then come with us and say that in a formal interview. Mercer cut in. He's not going anywhere without counsel and a warrant. He is a fleeing shooting suspect, Voss said. That makes him your matter until it intersects mine. Funny, Mercer replied. Everything in this county seems to intersect yours today. The broad-shouldered man started toward the gate, and Mercer's hand dropped to his holster. The air changed instantly. Emily could feel it like static. The second man near the SUV looked toward the tree line, scanning, impatient. Voss sighed. Sheriff, your understanding of jurisdiction is limited. Maybe, Mercer said. My understanding of trespass is excellent. For one stretched, terrible second, it looked like nobody would back down. Then Evan said, Wait. All eyes turned to him. He felt his own fear with startling clarity now, no longer masked by anger. If he ran again, he would become whatever story these people wanted. If he surrendered to them, he might disappear before anyone in Pine Ridge even knew what agency had taken him. He looked at Mercer, then Emily. If I go with you, he said to Voss, my sister stays out of it. Emily snapped. No. Voss answered first. That depends on her cooperation. Evan shook his head. Then I'm not going. Voss's voice cooled by several degrees. You misunderstand your options. A sound cut across the standoff then, small but distinct, from somewhere behind the barn. A metal clang followed by the low growl of an engine turning over. Everyone turned. Out from the barn side lane came Hank Caldwell, Evan and Emily's father, driving his old combine harvester like a battleship through weeds. He had been in the South Field since dawn and had only just heard enough from a hired hand over the radio to know strangers were at his house. Hank was 61, broad and weathered, with the permanent sun lines of a man who trusted weather less than people. He drove straight toward the gate, forcing Voss's men to jump back as the combine's header clattered within inches of the fence. The engine coughed black smoke and then idled like an animal growling in its sleep. Hank shut it off, climbed down, one rung at a time, and took in the scene. The sheriff, the SUVs, his son's face, his daughter crying without realizing it. Somebody want to tell me, he said. Why my yard looks like the start of a damn siege. No one answered right away. Hank looked at Evan. Boy? Evan's throat worked. I shot Troy Bennett. Hank stared. No visible reaction at first. Just the stillness of a man trying to verify he heard language correctly. Is he dead? Not yet, Mercer said. Hank took that in. He looked at Emily next. And why are suits from out of town on my property? Emily opened her mouth, but Voss spoke first. Mr. Caldwell, this concerns federal recovery operations tied to historical materials believed to be located beneath your northern acreage. Hank's eyes narrowed. That the fancy way of saying, you want my land. We want containment, Voss replied. Hank gave a humorless smile. Every thief says that. Bank says they're protecting assets. Developers say they're improving communities. Government says containment. Means the same thing. Means I lose what's mine. Voss removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp and unexpectedly tired. With respect, sir, if your family had understood what was there, you would have been evacuated years ago. Hank's smile disappeared. Then maybe you should have done your job years ago. That landed. Even Mercer glanced at him. Voss studied Hank for a beat, then said, Bring your children inside. We'll return with a judge's order, Mercer said. You do that. Voss put her sunglasses back on and signaled to her men. They withdrew to the SUVs without another word, but before getting in, she looked once more at Evan. Mr. Caldwell, if you think Mr. Bennett was dangerous, you should pray he was acting alone. Then she drove off. The dust from both SUVs drifted across the yard and hung there after they were gone. Hank turned to Mercer. Inside. Mercer nodded. I'd like that. The Caldwell kitchen smelled like coffee gone stale and wood polish, and the faint sweet rot of onions stored too long in a basket by the pantry. It was the kind of kitchen that had absorbed 3 generations of arguments into its walls. Hank stood at the sink, while Evan sat at the table, unable to touch the glass of water Emily had shoved toward him. Mercer remained by the back door, hat in hand again. Nobody rushed to speak. Finally Hank said, without turning around, Tell me everything. Leave nothing out. Evan did. He told the story in fragments at first, then in a hard, unbroken line, the diner, Troy's needling words, the gun in his jacket, the flash of rage that felt righteous until it became permanent. Emily told her part next, voice shaking only once when she described Troy's office, and the documents on his desk, and the way he kept saying, Your family doesn't understand what it's sitting on. Mercer filled in the rest about his father's warning, and the SUVs and the probable federal pressure now coming their way. Hank listened without interruption until the room went quiet again. Then he sat down across from Evan. Why was there a gun in your jacket? Evan looked up, startled. Dad. Why was there a gun in your jacket? Hank repeated. Evan stared at the table. I didn't plan to use it. Not what I asked. Evan's jaw tightened. Because I knew if Bennett pushed hard enough, I might want him scared. Hank nodded slowly, grief settling into his face in layers. There it is. Emily looked between them. Dad, this isn't all on him. No, Hank said. It never is. That's what ruins families. Everybody gets a piece. He looked at Evan. You think you were protecting your sister. Maybe you were. But protection turns ugly fast when pride gets in the driver's seat. Evan's eyes burned. He talked about her like she was trash. And now? Hank asked quietly. Now your sister gets federal agents in her yard and your sheriff in my kitchen and a brother who may go to prison. Tell me where the protection is in that. Evan flinched as if struck. Emily reached toward him but stopped short. Mercer finally spoke. Hank, there's another problem. If Bennett survives, he'll talk. If he dies, these people lose their intermediary and may get more aggressive. Hank leaned back, exhausted all at once. So, either way, we're the ones under the knife, Emily said. We should go public. 3 heads turned toward her. Her own voice sounded stronger now that she'd said it. If there's something under the land and they're trying to bury it, we tell people. Media, state police, whoever will listen. Mercer grimaced. Sometimes sunlight helps. Sometimes it just gives snakes a warmer rock. Doing nothing is worse, Emily said. She looked at Evan. And you don't get to keep deciding alone what this family can survive. The words hurt because they were true. Evan nodded once, small and ashamed. Hank rubbed both hands over his face. There's something I never told you to, he said. The room went still again. After your mother died, I got behind on the farm loan. Bad year, bad grain prices, worse judgment. 8 years ago, a man from Richmond came through, saying he represented private investors interested in mineral rights around the county. He offered me enough to clear the debt if I signed a preliminary access agreement for just the North Field. I told him no. He came back twice. Third time he said, You're not protecting your family by refusing. You're just keeping them poor. Hank looked at Emily, then Evan. I almost signed. I didn't because your mother used to say the quickest money always arrives carrying somebody else's hunger. But ever since then, every few years, somebody asks about that same field. Different name. Same interest. Mercer exhaled. So Bennett wasn't first. No, Hank said. Just the slickest. Evan felt something crack open in him then. Not relief. Not exactly. But the understanding that the pressure on the family had not begun with him. It had been waiting, testing weak boards, years before he ever put on a mechanic's shirt or Emily ever learned to drive. And yet the shot in the diner was still his. He could not hand that away to conspiracy or inheritance. I need to turn myself in, he said. The words came out flat and final. Emily stared. What? I need to go with Mercer, to county. Make a statement before they make one for me. Hank held his son's gaze for a long moment. That's the first smart thing you've said today. Emily's eyes filled again. If you go in now, they'll bury you under attempted murder and flight. Evan looked at her. Maybe, but running again just makes me useful to the wrong people. Mercer nodded slowly. I can bring you in myself. Keep the feds out as long as the county allows. Emily stood and paced to the window, wiping angrily at her face. Outside, the fields looked offensively normal, sunlight laying itself across rows of winter wheat, as if families weren't breaking inside the house. I hate all of this, she whispered. Hank answered, That's because it's real. The kitchen clock ticked. A truck passed on the road. Somewhere in the barn, a chain knocked lightly against wood. Evan stood. Before I go, he said, I need to show you where I found it. Mercer's eyes lifted. Now. Before those people come back with paper and machines. Hank rose too. Then we do it now. They drove out to the north field in Hank's old flatbed, Mercer following in the cruiser. The field rolled out under the noon sun, quiet and empty except for fence posts and winter-stiff grass. Evan led them to a patch near the tree line where the soil looked no different from the rest. But he knew the spot from the angle of a broken cedar post and the shallow dip where water gathered after rain. He took the shovel from the truck bed and started digging without another word. Hank took over after a minute, then Mercer, all three men working in tense rotation, while Emily watched and listened to the harsh scrape of metal on dirt that she dreaded and needed at the same time. After 15 minutes, Mercer's shovel struck something with a ringing tone too clean to be stone. Everyone froze. Evan dropped to his knees and brushed away dirt with both hands. Curved metal emerged, dark silver, smooth as before, except now a seam had opened slightly down one side, just enough to show a thin line of dull blue light within. Emily stepped back. Oh my God, Hank whispered. Jesus Christ. Mercer crouched, face drained. The humming started again, low and steady, almost like a distant transformer. Evan's right hand tingled before he even touched it. Don't, Emily said immediately. But he was already staring at the seam, because inside the narrow opening he could see something that looked horribly familiar. Not machinery exactly, but a folded packet sealed in transparent material, and through it a strip of yellowed paper with handwriting on it. Human handwriting. Hank caught sight of it too. There's a note in there, Mercer said. Nobody touch another damn thing. As if answering him, the blue line brightened. Then, from somewhere inside, the object came a soft mechanical click, followed by a burst of static that made Mercer's radio shriek at his hip. The cruiser 50 yards away flashed its lights once, twice, then went dead. Emily clapped hands over her ears. The humming rose in pitch. Evan felt the strange pull of recognition again, the irrational sense that the thing had been waiting for him specifically, and hated himself for even thinking it. Back up, Mercer ordered. Nobody moved fast enough. The seam opened another inch with a hiss, and a voice crackled out from within, distorted but unmistakably human, an old recording dragged across decades. If this is recovered outside chain protocol, do not transfer to Bennett. Repeat. Do not transfer to Bennett. Caldwell has to... The voice cut off in a wash of static. Every person in the field stared at the object in stunned silence. Mercer was first to move. He drew his service weapon without aiming it, pure instinct meeting total uselessness. Emily's face had gone white. Did it say Bennett? It said Caldwell too, Hank muttered. Evan's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his teeth. Not transfer to Bennett. Caldwell has to what? Know? Hide it? Destroy it? The unfinished sentence felt worse than a threat. In the distance, faint at first and then growing, came the sound of engines on the dirt road again. Mercer looked toward the house and saw dust rising. More vehicles this time. That's them, he said. And they brought friends. He looked at Evan, then at the exposed object humming in the earth. We are officially out of time. Hank looked from the road to the thing in the ground and made the decision the way farmers made most decisions, fast and ugly, and based on weather coming, whether you liked it or not. Cover it, he said. Mercer turned to him. With what? Dirt. With whatever buys us 10 seconds. The sound of approaching engines deepened, heavy tires grinding over the road toward the yard. Evan grabbed the tarp from the truck bed, a faded blue one used for hay bales, and he and Hank dragged it across the open section of ground while Mercer shoveled dirt over the exposed edges. Emily stood frozen only a second longer before she ran to the truck and hauled back a sack of feed and 2 rusted fence panels. They threw everything over the humming metal as if chaos itself might disguise it. The blue line dimmed under the tarp but did not vanish. A low vibration still trembled through the soil into their boots. That won't fool anybody, Emily said. It's not for fooling, Hank replied. It's for choosing what happens next. Mercer looked at the road again. 3 SUVs now, a county sedan behind them. Hell, he muttered. County? Evan asked. Mercer's jaw tightened. Looks like Judge Harlan's car. Emily stared. They brought a judge out here? Or somebody brought his signature, Mercer said. He holstered his weapon and wiped dirt from his hands, trying to think through 3 disasters at once. Evan's surrender. The object in the field. The recording naming Bennett and Caldwell in the same breath. He had spent most of his career believing the worst truths in a town were ordinary ones. Beatings behind closed doors, money skimmed from county contracts, drunk fathers and lonely wives and boys with guns. Those truths he understood. This thing under the ground felt like somebody had taken the plain shape of local tragedy and bent it around a darker center. The vehicle stopped by the house instead of driving straight into the field. Voss stepped out of the first SUV. Judge Harlan emerged from the sedan behind her, jacket buttoned wrong, face strained, as if being present here physically offended him. 2 uniformed state troopers got out of the second SUV. Mercer stared. Now that, he said, is showmanship. Hank handed Emily the truck keys. Go to the barn. She blinked. What? Go now. If this turns, do not stand in the open. I'm not leaving you. Hank grabbed her arm, not hard but firm enough to stop her. I didn't say leave. I said don't stand where strangers can count your tears. Emily looked at him, angry for one moment, then saw the fear behind his eyes and nodded. She jogged toward the barn and slipped behind the old grain silo, where she could still see the field through gaps in the cedar boards. Mercer, Hank, and Evan walked from the north field toward the yard together, not shoulder to shoulder exactly, but close enough that the shape mattered. Voss watched them approach. Judge Harlan cleared his throat and removed a folded packet from his briefcase. Sheriff Mercer, he said, trying for formal authority and sounding merely dry. I am here under emergency county cooperation powers in recognition of federal public safety concerns. I have authorized temporary access and containment of the Caldwell North acreage pending further review. Hank let out a bitter laugh. You always carry emergency powers in your trunk, Judge? Harlan did not meet his eyes. This is lawful. Lawful and decent are cousins that don't visit much, Hank said. Voss stepped forward before the exchange could grow roots. Where is the site? Mercer answered first. Before we do anything else, Evan Caldwell is surrendering to county custody in connection with the Bennett shooting. Evan almost flinched hearing it said aloud in front of these people. It made the diner real again, not just a hot wound in his head. Voss's expression did not change. That can proceed after containment. No, Mercer said. It proceeds now. Voss looked at him for a long beat. Sheriff, Mr. Caldwell is connected to protected material by both proximity and name. Your custody would be temporary at best. Then temporary is what you get, Mercer said. He comes with me. You want him later, file your papers through the state like everyone else, pretending to respect the law. Harlan shifted uneasily. One of the troopers avoided looking at anyone. Hank saw it all and understood something important. Not everybody standing there liked this arrangement. Some were merely trapped inside it. Judge, Hank said, look me in the face and tell me what's under my field. Harlan's mouth tightened. I don't have technical knowledge. Then what do you have? Hank pressed. Enough fear to drive out here with federal agents and sign away my land from the hood of a car? Harlan glanced toward Voss as if checking whether he was allowed to be human. Mr. Caldwell, I'm trying to prevent harm. To whom? Hank said. My family? My town? Or the people who lost whatever they buried? The question hung there. Voss finally said, there was an incident in 1979 involving transport of experimental defense-adjacent material. A component was lost. Retrieval was incomplete. Mercer folded his arms. Defense-adjacent. That's the phrase you're going with. Voss ignored him. The material was never intended for civilian exposure. Hank nodded toward the field. Yet here we all are. Evan had been quiet until then, the weight of impending arrest flattening everything else. But something in him snapped back awake at the word component. A component of what? He asked. Voss looked directly at him. A communications package. For what system? Emily's voice came from near the barn before anyone realized she had moved closer again. Voss's eyes flicked toward her, but she answered Evan. For a surveillance and response platform that was never formally acknowledged. Mercer gave a short, humorless smile. You government people love long sentences that end nowhere. Voss's face remained unreadable. It records, stores, and transmits conditional instructions through biometric triggers. Evan felt his skin go cold. Biometric triggers. Voss nodded once. The package was keyed to designated recovery lines. Certain family names were involved in the original chain. Caldwell was one. Hank stared. My father? Your grandfather, Voss said. The world seemed to tilt for Hank in a different way than it had for Evan. He had spent most of his adult life measuring his father through silence, through half-remembered discipline, and the farm passed down with too much duty and not enough tenderness. Now some buried federal lie had reached back and laid a hand on that old ghost. You're saying my grandfather was part of this? He assisted after the transport accident, Voss said. He provided land access and temporary concealment while recovery teams operated in severe weather conditions. Temporary concealment, Hank repeated. On our property. Under pressure, Voss said. He was told the county could be contaminated if the component was mishandled. Mercer watched Hank absorb that and knew the shape of the wound. Families in towns like Pine Ridge survived partly by believing the people before them had at least kept faith with the house, the land, the bloodline. To learn an ancestor had hidden something that poisoned the future felt like being betrayed by the dead. Hank's voice dropped. Did he tell anybody? Voss hesitated. Records indicate he informed one next of kin that the field should never be sold. Hank closed his eyes briefly. His father had told him that exact thing. Never sell the North Field. No reason given. Just said with the hard authority old men used when they wanted obedience to pass for wisdom. Son of a bitch, Hank whispered. Evan was looking at the road, at Mercer's cruiser, at the county sedan, at every visible symbol of law and process, and thinking how all of it suddenly seemed built for somebody else. And Bennett? He said. Why'd that recording say not to transfer to him? Voss's expression changed for the first time. Barely, but enough. I can't answer that. Mercer caught it, which means you can and don't like the answer. Evan stepped closer. He was your civilian intermediary. Why was he named in something from 1979? Voss took off her sunglasses again. Because Troy Bennett's father was on the original transport detail. That hit them all at once. Mercer exhaled sharply. Hank went still. Emma felt the hairs rise on her arms. Voss continued. For years, the Bennett family maintained unofficial awareness of the lost component through private channels. Troy leveraged that knowledge for profit. He was never authorized to recover anything. He inserted himself because he believed the material had financial and political value. Mercer said, so the man my suspect shot was running his own side game against the same secret your people were trying to bury. Yes, Voss said, and now he's in surgery. Evan stared at her. He talked like he knew more than all of you. He may have, Voss said quietly, which is part of the problem. The truth of that settled over the yard like heat. No clean sides, no noble institutions. Just people clutching fragments of a dangerous thing and lying in different accents about why. Hank looked at Mercer. If my son goes with you now, does he disappear into their paperwork by sundown? Mercer answered honestly. I don't know. Evan looked at his father. I go anyway. Hank turned to him. Maybe. Dad. Maybe. Hank repeated, louder this time. You don't get to run headfirst into punishment because guilt feels similar than thinking. Evan flinched. Hank stepped close enough that only family could speak that low and cut that deep. I know what you did. I know what you deserve maybe more than I can stand to hear. But I also know these people want you for reasons that have nothing to do with Troy Bennett bleeding in a diner. Emily saw the war on Evan's face and knew it wasn't just fear of prison. It was the seduction of surrender itself. A chance to stop deciding. A chance to let somebody else close the trap and call that justice. Evan, she said, voice shaking, don't confuse giving up with doing right. He looked at her and saw not the sister he'd tried to defend in rage, but the one standing here, forcing truth to stay complicated. It hurt more. Before he could answer, Mercer's radio crackled back to life with a burst of static. Then Deputy Ruiz's voice came through, broken but urgent. Sheriff, hospital update. Bennett is out of surgery. He's conscious. Repeating one name. Mercer snatched the radio up. Whose? Static swallowed a second. Then Ruiz said, Emily Caldwell. Every eye turned to Emily. Her mouth went dry. Why would he ask for me? Mercer asked the radio. Did he say anything else? Said if Emily doesn't hear it from him, everybody dies, not knowing what the machine was built to answer. The transmission cut out again. Silence followed, enormous and stupid and awful. Voss was the first to move. We're going to the hospital. Emily stepped back. No. Voss's tone sharpened. If Bennett has operational knowledge, this is no longer optional. Hank moved in front of his daughter. Ista. You want her. Say please with a warrant in your hand. Harlan opened his briefcase again. Flustered. We can arrange. Arrange? Hank thundered. You people arrange funerals and call it protocol. Mercer lifted a hand. Enough. He thought fast, sorting threats by immediacy. The object in the field was active. Bennett was alive. Federal pressure was now in the open. If Emily went alone, she was a witness with no shield. If she refused, Bennett might die, with whatever he knew. He looked at Emily. Do you think he'd talk to anyone else? She swallowed. No. Why? Mercer asked. Emily hesitated, then said it. Because, when I met him at his office, he wasn't just trying to buy the land. He was trying to hand me something. Voss's eyes narrowed. What? Emily reached into the pocket of her sweatshirt with trembling fingers and pulled out a small brass key on a cheap motel key tag. Room 12. Sunset Pines Motor Lodge. Mercer stared. You had that this whole time? I didn't know what it was, Emily said. He slipped it into my hand when I left. I thought maybe it was a setup, or maybe he was just being disgusting. I didn't tell Evan because... She stopped. Because everything had already felt dangerous. Because shame makes idiots of careful people. Because she had hoped ignoring something would unmake it. Voss stepped toward the key. Give me that. Emily closed her fist around it. No. Voss stopped, reading the room and finding less control than before. Mercer said, There's your answer. We do this my way. Voss looked at him with open irritation now. You do not have a way. I do today, Mercer said. Emily goes to the hospital with me. Hank goes too. Evan comes in county custody so nobody loses him in transit. We talk to Bennett. After that, we go to the motel and open whatever he left. You and one of your people can follow, not lead. Voss gave a thin smile. You think you're setting terms because you have local leverage. The only reason you are still doing that is because my orders currently prefer minimal disruption. Mercer returned the look. Then enjoy the preference. Harlan spoke softly, almost to himself. This is going to destroy the town. Hank heard him. No, Judge. People did that. Towns don't destroy themselves. The ride to Pine Ridge County Hospital split them into separate silences. Mercer drove with Emily in the front and Evan cuffed in the back, not because Mercer wanted humiliation in it, but because optics mattered, and because even Mercy needed paperwork. Hank followed in the flatbed. Voss's SUV stayed 2 car lengths behind the cruiser all the way into town. Pine Ridge looked normal at noon, in the cruel way towns often did, when private disaster traveled through them. Kids on bikes near the gas station, men loading lumber behind the hardware store, a woman carrying dry cleaning past the bank. Nobody on Main Street knew that federal agents were tailing their sheriff because of something humming under a farm. But word about the diner had spread. People saw Evan in the cruiser and stared. A few lifted phones. One old woman made the sign of the cross. Evan looked down at the divider screen and felt his stomach twist. This was the visible part of what he had done. The version everybody could understand. Gun, blood, flight. The rest of it, the buried thing, the recording, the field, would sound like excuse or madness if he spoke it aloud in the wrong room. Mercer, he said quietly from the back seat. If Bennett dies before we hear him. Mercer kept his eyes on the road. Then we deal with what's left. That's not an answer. Mercer's hands tightened on the wheel. No, it's adulthood. Emily turned in her seat to look at Evan. She wanted to say something comforting, but every honest comfort sounded weak, so she said the only real thing she had. Whatever he says, you still come home to the truth after. Evan laughed once under his breath. You say that like home's still standing. It is, she said. That's why this hurts. At the hospital entrance, Deputy Ruiz was waiting, with 2 more deputies, and a face that said her day had become unrecognizable. She opened the rear cruiser door and looked at Evan. You're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, pending further charges. Evan nodded as if hearing weather. Ruiz was gentler after that, keeping one hand light on his arm as she guided him inside. In the hallway outside ICU, Troy Bennett lay behind glass and machines. Bandages wrapped his shoulder and upper chest. His face looked older without confidence animating it. One eye was swollen, half shut. He turned his head when Emily entered, and something like relief crossed his features. Voss stayed outside the room with Mercer and Hank, arguing in clipped whispers about access. Ruiz kept Evan at the doorway in cuffs. Emily stepped to the bedside alone. Troy's voice came out thin and ragged. "You came. You asked for me," Emily said. "You have about 1 minute before I stop regretting that." Troy managed a pained smile. "Still got steel." "Don't." Her anger surprised even her with its steadiness. "You lied to me. You goaded my brother. You used our family." Troy's good eye closed briefly. "I know." "Then talk." He opened his eye again, and looked not at her face, but at the key clenched in her hand. "Room 12, he whispered. "Ledger in the vent, tape recorder too, take both." Emily leaned in. "What's the machine in the field?" Troy coughed, winced, and stared toward the ceiling like he was reading old guilt written there. "It wasn't built to send messages," he said. "That's the lie they all liked because it sounded containable. It was built to receive one." Emily felt the room constrict. Receive what? Troy's lips trembled with either pain or fear. A response. Outside the glass, Mercer had gone very still. Voss pushed past him into the room. "From whom?" she demanded. Troy saw her, and something dark and almost amused moved through his ruined face. "There she is," he whispered. "The woman who inherited a fire and called it policy." Voss leaned over him. "Answer the question." Troy looked back at Emily instead. "Your grandfather knew." "My father knew too late. The package was part of a test. Not surveillance. Contact verification. They sent out a signal after the crash." He swallowed painfully. Something answered. Emily's breath caught. What answered? Troy's gaze drifted toward Evan at the door. "That's what nobody ever agreed on." Voss's jaw tightened. "Agreed on by who?" Troy's breath hitched. "By the people who built careers on not naming things." His fingers twitched weakly against the hospital sheet, as if trying to reach for the morphine pump, and some vanished version of control at the same time. "My father was on the truck. Not military, not really. Contract, transport." He said after the wreck, the crate was cracked open in the ditch, and one of the men on scene heard a signal start up, low and rhythmic, like a pulse. Then another sound answered from somewhere beyond the creek, not from the machine, from outside it. Emily felt a cold wave move through her chest. Outside where? Troy smiled faintly, painfully. "That's what split them. Some said radio reflection, some said another unit, some said the woods." Voss cut in. "Folklore." Troy's good eye shifted to her. "Your people always say folklore when the report gets ugly." Mercer stepped farther into the room, no longer pretending this was some conversation he could keep tidy for county records. "What did your father believe?" Troy swallowed. "He believed something came to the crash site after they sent the signal, and that whatever it wasn't there for long because the transport team arrived and the woods went dead again." Evan stood in the doorway listening, wrists cuffed in front now, every word dragging him farther from the version of reality he still knew how to live inside. "And Caldwell," he said. "Why would that thing react to me?" Troy's face turned toward him. For the first time since the diner, there was no smugness there, only a wrecked kind of honesty that might have been too late to matter. "Because your grandfather touched it first. My father wrote that in the ledger." He said the package changed after contact. Started recording names, pulses, speech patterns. That's why they wanted the line contained through the family. Not because your people were important. Because you were contaminated in the paperwork. Hank, standing just behind Mercer, closed his eyes as if the word had struck him physically. "Don't say that in front of my children." Troy's gaze flicked to him. "It happened before any of us got a vote." Voss folded her arms. If the package was keyed to the Caldwell line, why involve Bennett at all? "Because by the 90s, nobody trusted the original records," Troy said. "Too much redaction, too many dead men. My father kept copies. Troy Bennett became useful because his father stole paper." He let out a rough little laugh, and then winced at the pain it caused. "Family businesses in this country are never what the brochures say." Emily stepped closer to the bed. "What do you want from me?" Troy looked at her so directly it made her skin go hot. "The truth to live somewhere the county can't bury it." He coughed again, hard enough that the monitor spiked and a nurse glanced anxiously through the glass. "Room 12 has the ledger. And a tape. My father made it in 1988, after he started drinking himself apart. Said, if anyone ever found the package again, the recording was insurance." Voss moved as if to leave immediately for the motel, but Mercer blocked the door. "Not without me." "You are not equipped for evidence control," Voss snapped. "And you are not equipped for trust," Mercer said. Ruiz, who had been silent until then, spoke up from the hall. "Sheriff, the nurse says he can't keep this up much longer." Troy gave a slow, tired nod. "Good. I'm tired." Emily's anger, which had kept her upright all morning, suddenly thinned enough to expose the grief underneath. Not grief for Troy exactly. More for the shape of everything, for how one rotten man could still be carrying a piece of truth no one else had. "Why did you say those things in the diner?" she asked, voice low. "About me." Troy looked ashamed then, fully and nakedly ashamed, in a way she hadn't believed he was capable of. "Because I needed your brother off balance. Because I knew he'd come if I used you. Because men raised around pride break fastest through the women they think they're protecting." Emily stared at him with contempt so clean it felt almost holy. "Then you got what you wanted." "No," Troy whispered. "I got shot before I could finish the sale." That ugly honesty hung in the room. He wasn't asking forgiveness. He wasn't even pretending remorse made him better. Mercer, who had seen enough deathbed confessions to know how self-serving they could be, still believed him because of the lack of poetry in it. Troy had wanted leverage and lost control of the explosion he lit. Nothing grander. "One more question," Mercer said. "What was the machine built to answer?" Troy looked toward the window where afternoon light had gone pale and thin. "A signal sent from something not ours," he said. "That was the original theory. Or the bait. Depends who wrote the budget memo. They sent a pattern they thought might provoke recognition. Then at the crash site, after the transport was compromised, the package started recording responses on its own." "Responses from what?" Hank said again, anger shaking now under fear. Troy's breathing turned shallower. "Coordinates, pulses, voice fragments, human phrases mixed with something else. My father said one phrase repeated in English after the wreck. Same words every time. Where is the witness line? He swore that was what it said." Emily's mouth went dry. Evan felt his heartbeat in his throat. Voss's expression barely shifted, but Mercer caught the reaction. She had heard some version of this before. "You knew," he said. Voss met his eyes. "I knew there were disputed signal interpretations." "That's a politician's answer. That's the only kind this subject survives," she replied. Troy's voice weakened to a thread. "Get the ledger. Don't let them separate it from the tape." His eye settled one last time on Emily. "If there's another response, it'll happen soon. Activity rises after contact. That's what my father wrote." The nurse entered then, brisk and angry in the way nurses become when frightened men with badges treat a room like a theater. "That's enough. Everyone out except one." Emily stepped back. Voss didn't argue, perhaps because Troy had already given the part she wanted. Mercer gestured to Ruiz. "Stay on him." Troy caught Mercer's sleeve as he turned. "Sheriff." Mercer leaned closer. "What?" Troy's lips moved slowly. "I never knew if my father was lying about one thing. He said the first Caldwell they tagged wasn't the grandfather." Mercer frowned. "Then who?" Troy's voice nearly vanished. "The grandmother." Then the nurse pulled Mercer away and began checking lines and monitors while the others filed into the hall with more questions than before. The corridor smelled like bleach and fear. Hank sank into a plastic chair and rubbed both hands over his face. Emily stood by the vending machine, gripping the motel key hard enough to leave teeth marks in her palm. Evan remained under Ruiz's watch near the wall, cuffs catching the fluorescent light every time he shifted. Voss paced once, twice, then stopped. "We go to the motel now." Hank looked up. "You hear the part where he might die? Maybe that changes your appetite for field trips." "If the ledger is there, every minute matters," Voss said. Mercer had no patience left for polished urgency. "Fine. Then here's how it goes. Ruiz brings Evan to County Holding. He is booked officially and seen by local council before sunset." Evan started to protest, but Mercer cut him a look that said, "Not now. Hank and Emily come with me to Sunset Pines. Voss, you and one agent ride behind us. Nobody touches anything till I see it." Voss smiled thinly. "Your ability to mistake negotiation for authority is almost admirable." Mercer stepped into her space, not touching, not threatening, but close enough that the difference between civil service and personal fury narrowed to a wire. "Lady, I got a kid in cuffs because your side outsourced a federal secret to a local parasite. I got a county judge serving as your chauffeur. And I got something active under farmland in my jurisdiction. So for the next hour, you can borrow my authority or test it. Choose." Voss held the stare. Then, with visible reluctance, she nodded once. "1 hour. Good," Mercer said. "Use it wisely." Emily crossed to Evan before Ruiz led him away. They stood close but not touching because handcuffs made everything intimate in the worst way. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She shook her head. Not here. I need to say it. Later, she said, eyes wet but steady. Don't spend the last free words you get on something I already know. He looked at her, startled by the mercy in that, and saw how tired she was. You shouldn't have had to carry any of this alone. Emily almost laughed. Well, I didn't. That's kind of the problem. Ruiz gave them one more second, then touched Evan's elbow. He let himself be led away. Hank watched his son disappear down the corridor and felt an old, private shame rise in him. The shame of fatherhood failing in places no one sees. He had taught Evan how to rebuild carburetors, set fence posts, judge weather off, smell and wind. He had not taught him what to do with humiliation, or how to sit inside helpless anger without trying to turn it into action. Maybe no father ever really taught that. Maybe boys learned it only after they'd already broken something. The drive to Sunset Pines Motor Lodge took 12 minutes. It sat off the highway near the truck stop, a low row of sun-bleached rooms with a flickering vacancy sign that worked only when kicked. Mercer remembered the place from domestic calls and meth busts and one old fugitive who had hidden there for 3 days because he assumed nobody would look in a motel that sad. Hank parked beside the office. Voss's SUV pulled in behind them. The motel manager, a thin man in a stained polo named Nate, stepped halfway out of the office and froze when he saw the cluster of badges. What's going on? Mercer flashed his shield. Need access to room 12. Nate blinked. That room's still paid through Friday. By Troy Bennett? Mercer asked. Yeah. Nate looked from Mercer to Voss and back again. He in trouble? Hank muttered. More than your deposit covers. Mercer took the master key from Nate's reluctant hand and walked to room 12, with Emily and Hank beside him. Voss and one of her agents followed. The room smelled of stale air, motel detergent, and the faint medicinal tang of aftershave. The bed was made too neatly, which somehow made it worse. Bennett had used the place like an office, not a hideout. Mercer closed the door behind them and began searching with methodical economy. Hank checked drawers. Emily stood still for a second, orienting herself. He said the vent. She crossed to the wall heater beneath the window and crouched. The metal grate had one screw newer than the others. Here. Voss moved immediately. Don't touch it. Emily ignored her and looked at Mercer. He nodded. Hank fetched a pocket screwdriver from his truck keys. The screw came loose with a faint squeal. Mercer pulled off the grate and reached inside. His hand brushed paper, then a small cassette recorder, old enough to belong to another century. He withdrew a thick black ledger bound with twine and a microcassette recorder wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Voss took an involuntary step forward. Give me those. Mercer held them out of reach. After I know what they are. He set both items on the small motel desk. The ledger's cover had no label, only a water stain spreading across one corner like an old bruise. Emily could hear her own breathing. Hank stood behind her, solid as a wall, but colder than he had been all day. Mercer untied the twine and opened the ledger. The first pages were dated 1,979 inches, cramped block handwriting. Transport route notes, weather conditions, names with initials only, references to asset package, response pattern variance, and local containment family. Mercer turned pages faster. There were maps, transcribed radio chatter, and in the margin beside one entry, underlined twice, the words Bennett line compromised. Do not transfer to civilian relay. Caldwell witness line stable. Voss leaned in despite herself. Hank saw red. Stable, he said. Like we were livestock. Mercer kept reading. Here. The 14th of December, 1979. Primary surface contact not made by Henry Caldwell as assumed. Contact event initiated when May Caldwell approached scene with blankets and touched exposed casing before perimeter complete. Package registered vocal pattern and cardiac response. Subsequent line designation altered. Hank stared at the page. May, he whispered. His mother, not his father. Emily looked up at him. He had never spoken much of May Caldwell beyond the practical legends. Made biscuits before dawn, buried 3 dogs herself, once stared down a banker until he left the porch. Now her dead hand had reached out of 1,979 and touched this disaster first. Mercer kept going. A later page from 1,988 was written in a shakier hand. If anything ever happens to me, understand this was never retrieval only. The response after impact contained human reference. It learned from first contact. Family line attachment may not be passive. They will call it superstition because the alternative costs too much. If package surfaces again, do not trust federal intermediary channels, and do not trust my son if he starts smelling money. Hank gave a dark laugh. At least one Bennett told the truth about family. Voss said quietly, let me see that. Mercer flipped past more entries. There were references to seasonal spikes, unexplained equipment failure near the North Field, and one sentence that made Emily feel her stomach drop. If second answer event occurs, witness line must choose concealment or broadcast. No middle position remains. What does that mean? Emily asked. No one answered. Mercer picked up the microcassette recorder. Only one way to find out more. Nate, the motel manager, was bullied into finding an ancient boombox from the office storage closet, the kind used for Christmas music in the lobby years earlier. Mercer slid in the tape. Static burst through the tinny speaker, followed by a man's tired voice, older and rougher than Troy's but carrying the same edge around the vowels. My name is Gerald Bennett. If this tape is playing, then either I grew a conscience too late, or someone finally dug up what should have stayed buried. I'm recording this sober, which is how you know I mean it. Static crackled, then the voice continued. The government men said the package was experimental communication equipment. That was the clean story. What I saw at Miller's Creek wasn't clean. When the truck split and the casing opened, there was light inside but no bulb. There was a sound like people trying to talk through frozen glass. Then a farm woman walked up before she should have been allowed close. May Caldwell. Small woman. Fierce posture. She touched the metal and the sound changed. It repeated her breathing back to us. Not exactly. Better than exactly. Emily wrapped her arms around herself. The tape rolled on. After they moved the package to the Caldwell field for temporary concealment, we got 3 nights of responses. One from radio, one from the package, one from outside both. Men argued over source. I wrote down what I heard because somebody had to remember it before the paperwork got polished. Phrase 1. Witness line established. Phrase 2. Awaiting answer body. Phrase 3. Repeated different each time. Where is the missing house? No one could explain that. Maybe no one wanted to. By day 4, the signal stopped. The package was declared dormant, but one colonel told me off record it wasn't dormant, it was listening. Hank sank slowly onto the motel bed, as if his knees had decided without consulting him. Voss stood rigid, every controlled line in her body strained by the tape's existence. Gerald Bennett's voice lowered. If my son Troy ever gets involved in this, God help whoever stands near him. He thinks every secret is a lock waiting for his hand. But this thing isn't money. It attaches. It waits. If the witness line wakes it again, the only chance is full exposure. Nothing contained stays kind. The tape clicked, hissed, and then there was one final section, clearly recorded at a different time. Gerald sounded drunk and terrified. I dreamed of the field again, heard a woman's voice asking for her kitchen. Maybe May, maybe not May. I don't know what belongs to the package anymore. If the answer comes back, it will use what the line loves. That's how anything gets in. The tape snapped off. Nobody in the room spoke for several long seconds. Traffic hummed faintly from the highway outside. Somewhere in the motel plumbing, a pipe knocked. Emily was first to move. She took the ledger from Mercer and turned pages until she found the maps. One rough drawing showed the Caldwell house, the North Field, Miller's Creek, and a circled notation west of the barn, labeled Old Foundation. What's this? She asked. Hank looked over. His face changed. There used to be a tenant house there before I was born. Storm took it down in the 50s. Emily heard the taped phrase in her head again. Where is the missing house? Mercer looked between the map and Hank. You never mentioned that. Hank rubbed his jaw. Because it was gone before my time. Just cinder blocks and stories. Voss stepped closer to the map. If the package references spatial memory tied to first contact environment, then structural absence may matter. Mercer stared at her. You just said 12 impossible words and somehow none of them helped. But Emily understood enough. The thing under the field might not just be waiting. It might be orienting itself through family memory, through land changed by time, through losses no one had thought counted. She looked at Hank. Grandma May touched it. What if it learned the farm from her? Hank said nothing. He was remembering his mother standing at the sink, flour on her forearms, sometimes going still, and looking toward the north field like she'd heard somebody call from too far away. As a boy, he had asked once what she was listening for. She'd said, "A house that isn't there anymore." He had laughed because children laugh at the sentences they don't want to inherit. Now, the memory made him sick. Mercer checked his watch and exhaled. We're close to 9,000 words in the shape of this day, he said to no one in particular. Though what he meant was simpler. They were running out of room. We go back to the farm. We secure the field. We keep county and federal both in sight. And then we decide what exposure means before the thing decides for us. Voss lifted her chin. Exposure could cause panic. Containment already caused blood, Emily said. Her voice did not shake this time. I'm done letting adults trade lies because they think fear belongs only to them. Mercer looked at her and saw, with a strange mix of pity and respect, that the center of the story had shifted while none of them were watching. Evan had lit the fire, Troy had fed it, Voss had tried to fence it, but Emily was the one now choosing where the smoke would go. Hank stood slowly from the bed. Then we go home. The drive back to the Caldwell farm felt like heading toward a storm that had already decided where to land. The sky over Pine Ridge had turned the flat color of dirty aluminum, clouds gathering low over the fields in a way Hank didn't like. He drove his flatbed too fast, Emily beside him with the ledger on her lap and the motel key still in her fist like a charm that had failed once and might fail again. Mercer followed close behind in the cruiser, and Voss's SUV stayed behind him, no longer pretending distance meant neutrality. As they passed the edge of town, church bells began ringing the quarter hour. Ordinary sound laid over extraordinary dread. Emily watched the hardware store, the laundromat, the cracked basketball court by the elementary school slide by in a blur, and thought how offensive it was that a town could keep looking this innocent, while the truth underneath it rotted. When we get there, Hank said, eyes fixed on the road. You stay near me. Emily turned to him. No. He gripped the wheel tighter. Emily. No, she repeated, calmer now. I stayed near people all day, and they still made choices around me like I was furniture. I'm done. Hank exhaled through his nose, long and tired. You sound like your grandmother. The one who touched the thing first? She said. Hank almost smiled, but it fell away before it fully formed. Yeah, that one. Behind them, Mercer's radio crackled again. Ruiz's voice came through, breathless and thin with static. Sheriff, you need to hear this. Bennett coded 10 minutes ago. Mercer tightened his grip on the wheel. Dead? Yeah. But before he went, he tried to get one more message out. Nurse heard him say, don't let them rebuild the house. Then he crashed. Mercer closed his eyes for 1 second and opened them again. Nothing clean about it. No chance for follow-up. No easy target left to blame. He keyed the radio. How's Caldwell? Ruiz knew without asking which one. Booked. Lawyers on the way. He keeps asking what's happening at the farm. Mercer looked ahead at Hank's truck cutting through the gray afternoon. Tell him the truth. Which part? Ruiz asked. Mercer almost laughed. The bad part. When they turned onto the dirt road leading home, all illusion of control vanished. The yard was full. County vehicles lined one side of the drive. 2 utility trucks idled near the barn. A portable floodlight tower had been brought in, though the sun had not set yet. Half a dozen men in dark field jackets were moving toward the north acreage carrying sealed cases and antenna rigs. The blue tarp they had thrown over the buried object earlier was gone. The north field itself seemed wrong now, a pale patch of churned dirt visible even from the house like an opened wound. Hank slammed on the brakes so hard the flatbed fishtailed. Son of a bitch. Emily was already reaching for the door handle. Mercer jumped from his cruiser before it stopped rolling fully and strode toward the cluster of agents. Who authorized this? Voss got out of her SUV behind him and swore under her breath. Apparently, even she had not expected escalation at this speed. One older man in a charcoal overcoat turned from the field. He had a narrow face, silver hair cut close, and the bland confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime mistaking clearance for virtue. Director Kell, Voss said sharply. You were not supposed to move until I reported. Kell glanced at her, unimpressed. Circumstances changed. Mercer stepped between them and the field crew. This is private property. Kell looked at him like a mayor entertaining a complaint about parking meters. This is now a federal hazard zone. Hank came up hard on Mercer's shoulder. You don't get to name my land after the fact. Kell shifted his gaze to Hank. You are standing on a site with unknown response capacity tied to legacy contact technology. Your attachment to it is understandable but irrelevant. Emily heard that and walked straight toward him before anybody could stop her. Say irrelevant again. Kell looked at her, assessing. You're the daughter. I'm the one carrying the record your people buried for 40 years. She lifted the ledger. And I'm the one who heard Bennett die, trying to warn us not to let you rebuild the house. That got his attention. Not the emotion, the information. Mercer saw it instantly. Kell's pupils changed. Give me the ledger, Kell said. Emily laughed once, bitter and astonished. There it is. That's all any of you know how to ask for. Kell nodded toward one of the field technicians. Proceed. Mercer put a hand on the man's chest and shoved him back 1 step. The technician froze, startled less by the force than by the fact that a county sheriff had touched him at all. Every deputy in the yard suddenly went still, instinct sensing the edge of a line. Voss said, Director, stand down. We do not yet know what a second answer event entails. Which is why we secure the package and re-establish the missing structure geometry immediately, Kel replied. Hank looked from Voss to Kel. Rebuild what? Voss answered, reluctance tightening each word. The tenant house foundation west of the barn. If the package is orienting toward absent spatial memory, then recreating the footprint may stabilize response patterns. Emily stared at her. You want to build a dead house because a machine remembers my great-grandmother, Kel said. I want to prevent broadcast. Mercer snapped. Broadcast to who? Kel's eyes moved to the north field and stayed there. That remains the wrong question. The wind rose then, sharp enough to rattle the loose tin on the barn roof. Somewhere in the north field, equipment began beeping in a rapid escalating sequence. Every head turned. One of the technicians shouted, We've got signal rise. Another called out, Thermal anomaly, expanding outside containment ring. Mercer didn't even think before moving. He ran toward the field with Hank and Emily behind him, Voss after them, agents spilling sideways in disorder. The dirt around the exposed object had darkened, as if soaked by something that wasn't water. The metal curve was fully visible now, bigger than it had seemed before, almost coffin-shaped when seen without the tarp. The seam glowed brighter blue than before, but now threads of pale light were moving out from it through the soil in branching lines like roots made of radio static. The air around it buzzed against the teeth. Emily stopped 10 feet away, breath catching. It's bigger. No, Voss said quietly. It's opening. Kel barked orders at the technicians to deploy a field shroud. But before anyone could move close enough, the package emitted a low tone that rolled across the field and into the yard. Every light on the property flickered. The flood tower popped and went dark. Hank heard, with sick certainty, the front porch screen door slam even though he knew nobody had touched it. Emily heard dishes clink inside the kitchen like somebody setting a table. Mercer heard an old police scanner dispatch from 20 years ago, his father's voice saying his name. The sound was not loud. It was intimate. That made it worse. Everybody back, Voss shouted, but the package gave another tone, and this time the field changed. Not physically at first. More like the air thickened with another arrangement trying to layer itself over the present one. Emily blinked and saw, for half a second, a small white tenant house standing where only weeds should be. Porch sagging. Curtain in one window moving, though there was no breeze. Then it was gone. Hank staggered. I saw it. Mercer glanced at him. Me too. Kel, who had likely spent decades reading files about events like this from safe rooms far away, looked suddenly stripped of language. Impossible, he whispered. Emily clutched the ledger against her chest. In her mind, Gerald Bennett's tape unspooled again. If the answer comes back, it will use what the line loves. That's how anything gets in. She looked from the field to the house, to the old concrete stubs west of the barn, where the tenant foundation had once sat. Don't rebuild it, she said. That's what it wants. Kel rounded on her. You do not know that. Neither do you. We have models. You have excuses, Emily said. This thing uses memory. Absence matters to it. The missing house matters because it isn't there. If you put it back, you complete something. Voss looked at Emily hard. Really looked now, not as a civilian variable, but as a person whose reading of the event might be better than her own briefing. Director, she said carefully. She may be right. Reconstructive mimicry could function as a handshake, Kel snapped. And doing nothing guarantees what? Hank laughed harshly. Look at you, all those words, and still just guessing on my land. The package tone deepened again. One of the technicians fell to his knees and clutched his head. Another screamed, not from pain exactly, but from hearing something no one else could. Mercer rushed forward and dragged the kneeling man back by his jacket while Voss shouted for the others to kill every active transmitter. Antenna rigs dropped into the dirt. Portable monitors went dark one by one. The buzzing eased slightly. It's feeding off the equipment, Voss said. Kel's face tightened. Then isolate manually. No, Emily said, and this time she knew. She knew with the terrifying confidence of a person stepping onto a bridge she couldn't prove would hold. It's not feeding, it's answering. Every time you throw hardware at it, you tell it you're still trying to talk. Hank turned to her. Emily. She looked at him, at Mercer, at Voss, then toward the county road where Pine Ridge lay beyond the rise, with its homes and school and diner and church and all the ordinary fragile places people thought were protected by boredom. The ledger said, witness line must choose concealment or broadcast. No middle position remains. We keep trying to bury this. Somebody else takes control and calls it safety until the next man gets shot over it. Or we expose all of it, every page, every tape, every person standing here. Kel's expression became cold in a different way, less rattled now that a human enemy had presented itself. You release classified material tied to unstable technology, and I will arrest everyone on this property if I have to. Mercer stepped between Kel and Emily without even noticing he'd done it. You'll get in line. Kel's eyes narrowed. Sheriff, be very careful. Mercer thought of his father, drunk in a recliner, muttering about a transport accident nobody was supposed to remember. He thought of all the years that warning had sat in him like a splinter he'd called superstition, because superstition was easier than cowardice. I'm done being careful, he said. Careful built this. Hank put one hand on Emily's shoulder. It was not restraint. It was recognition. If you do this, he said, voice low, there is no putting us back. Farm may be gone. Town may turn on us. Your brother's case gets uglier, not better. Emily looked at him, tears gathering, and not falling. It's already ugly. I know, Hank said. I just need to hear that, you know. She nodded. The package emitted a softer sound then, almost a breath, and to Emily it felt less like threat than waiting. Waiting for the family to decide whether it would remain a buried instrument for powerful liars or become everybody's problem. No clean solution. Troy had been right about that much. Saving one thing would damage another. Mercer took out his phone. The signal was weak but not dead. County scanner streams on the local news site, he said. Sheriff's Department social page too. If I go live, it spreads before anybody can stop it. Kel lunged one step toward him. Hank blocked him with both hands and a farmer's dead weight. Don't. Voss did not move to help Kel. Instead, she said, almost to herself, minimal disruption is no longer on the table. Then she looked at Emily. If he does this, my agency will deny everything first. Then they'll come for the originals. Emily held up the ledger. Then they'll have to do it in public. Mercer opened the live stream with clumsy thumbs and turned the phone so the camera took in the field, the package, the agents, the county vehicles, the whole absurd American pageant of concealed power failing in a muddy farm lot. His hand shook once, then he steadied it. My name is Daniel Mercer, he said into the phone. I'm sheriff of Pine Ridge County, and if this feed stays up long enough, the people watching it need to know. Their government buried hazardous material under private land in this county after a 1979 transport incident. I have documents and witnesses on scene. I am making this public because attempts at quiet containment have already led to violence, coercion, and death. Voss closed her eyes briefly. Kel swore and reached for the phone, but Hank shoved him back hard enough to send him stumbling into the dirt. Deputies moved instinctively, not sure who they were separating anymore. Mercer kept talking. Emily stepped into frame beside him and held up the ledger. My family was used to hide this, she said, voice breaking and recovering in the same sentence. And my brother is in jail right now because people in power let men like Troy Bennett profit from secrets they were too cowardly to own. The comments on the live stream exploded faster than Mercer could read. Viewers from town, first, then beyond. Names he recognized, then reporters, then strangers. Someone in the yard shouted that the feed had already been reposted. Kel went white with fury. Kill every signal on this property. You do that, Mercer said, without lowering the phone, and it'll look exactly like what it is. For one suspended moment, the whole field seemed to listen. Then the package tone changed. It rose, not in volume but in clarity, and the air above the old tenant foundation shimmered into shape. This time the missing house did not flicker. It appeared in outline, pale and transparent, a farmhouse-sized ghost sketched in blue light over the old cinder blocks. A front porch, a roofline, one lit square where a kitchen window would have been. Deputies backed away, cursing. One state trooper crossed himself. Emily heard a woman humming inside the impossible shape, a tune she knew without ever remembering learning it. Hank's hand went slack on her shoulder. That was my mother's song, he whispered. Mercer felt a pressure build in his ears. The live stream phone crackled but stayed on. Comments raced. People were seeing it. Not as rumor, not as classified report. Seeing it. Voss stared at the luminous house with naked dread. It's completed its reference, she said. Without reconstruction. Because it didn't need boards, Emily said. It needed witnesses. The kitchen window in the apparition brightened. Something moved behind it. Not a full figure, more an impression of someone standing where a stove might be. Then a voice came from the package, and the house at once, layered, human and not, female and mechanical, and somehow old. Witness line present, it said. Missing, house acknowledged. Answer, body unavailable. Hank made a sound Emily had never heard from him, a wounded child sound dragged out of an old man. Mercer forced himself to keep the phone steady. What do you want? Emily said aloud before fear could stop her. The voice paused, as if searching through borrowed language. Return record. No burial. No relay theft. Witness line choose. Emily looked at the ledger in her hands, then at the ghost house, then at the real farmhouse behind them where all the ordinary pain of her family still lived. Kel shouted, "Destroy the feed and seize the object now." Voss turned on him. "If you touch it while it's in active response, you could trigger a full transmission event." "Then, contain the witness line," Kel snapped. "Too late," Voss said. "She already chose." Emily knew what that meant even before she moved. She walked toward the package. Hank grabbed for her and missed by inches. "Emily!" Mercer shouted. Voss shouted too, but Emily kept going until she stood at the seam, blue light washing her face. Her heart hammered so hard she thought she might faint. She held the ledger over the opening. "No more burying," she whispered. Then she dropped it in. The effect was immediate. The blue lines in the soil flared bright, not outward toward town but inward, collapsing back toward the package as if the land were inhaling. The ghost house shuddered. The humming rose to a pitch that made everyone cover their ears. Pages from the ledger, though swallowed by the seam, seemed to burst upward as light instead of paper, hundreds of pale fragments lifting into the air and dissolving like ash in reverse. The voice spoke one last time, clearer now, almost gentle. "Witness line recorded." Then the package sealed. The blue vanished. The ghost house went dark window by window until nothing remained over the old foundation, but wind moving through weeds. Silence hit so hard it felt like a blow. A dog barked far off near the highway. Somebody in the yard was crying. Emily stood staring at the closed metal surface, waiting for more. But there was only the ordinary smell of dirt after disturbance and the ragged breathing of living people. Hank reached her first and turned her around and held her so tight she could barely breathe. He had not hugged her like that since her mother's funeral. "You don't get to do that again," he said into her hair, voice shattered. Emily started crying then, not graceful tears, just exhaustion breaking through the center of her. Mercer lowered the phone slowly. The live stream was still running. Thousands watching. Enough. More than enough. Kel looked around the yard, at deputies, agents, citizens' phones, now raised from the road where neighbors had begun to gather, and he seemed to understand in one ugly instant that containment had died in public. He turned to Voss. "This is on you." Voss looked at the sealed package, then at Emily in Hank's arms, then at Mercer holding a phone that had just detonated 40 years of secrecy. "No," she said quietly. "This was always on you people." By sunset, the county road was blocked in both directions. State officials were arriving. News vans, too. Lawyers. More uniforms. More suits. Pine Ridge would never be quiet again. Not in the old way. Mercer finally ended the live stream and let Ruiz, who had rushed from town after the feed exploded, take the phone from his numb hand. "Evan saw it," she said softly. "On the holding room TV." Mercer nodded once. "How'd he take it?" Ruiz looked toward Emily. Like a man realizing his mistake didn't stop being his, just because the world got stranger. That sounded right. In the jail 2 miles away, Evan sat alone on the bench under fluorescent lights and watched replay after replay of his sister at the field. His father shoving a federal director into the dirt, the ghost of a house rising over land he had driven across his whole life without seeing any of it. He felt no relief, only a harsher version of clarity. What he had done at the diner was still there, stupid and hot and permanent. The secret under the farm did not excuse it. But maybe, for the first time all day, he could imagine a future in which his guilt belonged to the truth instead of to somebody else's manipulation. That was not redemption. It was merely the beginning of an honest sentence. On the farm, Hank sat on the porch steps after dark, with Emily wrapped in a blanket beside him, both of them watching portable lights from state investigators sweep the north field in slow arcs. The package remained closed, silent, half buried in shadow. Voss stood near Mercer by the gate, both of them too tired to posture. "What happens now?" Mercer asked. Voss gave a small, defeated shrug. "Congressional review, agency denials, independent experts, lawsuits, opportunists, conspiracy circuits, real inquiries buried under fake ones. The American way." Mercer almost smiled. "And the farm?" Voss looked toward Hank and Emily. "The land will likely be impounded for years." Hank heard that from the porch and said without turning, "Knew there'd be a bill." Voss walked closer, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "For what it's worth, your daughter may have prevented a more dangerous activation." Hank looked at her. "For what it's worth, that sentence doesn't buy back my son's freedom." Voss accepted that without defense. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "Will you help him?" she asked. It was the first direct question she'd asked Voss without anger in it. Voss took a moment. I can testify that Bennett's actions materially contributed to the confrontation. I can also testify that federal interference and undisclosed coercive pressure were factors in your family's state of mind. Mercer glanced at her. That's almost decent. Don't get used to it, Voss said. Emily nodded. It wasn't enough. It mattered anyway. A little later, Mercer drove back to town to speak to Evan through the holding room glass. The young man looked older already. Emily, okay? Was the first thing he asked. Shaken, Mercer said. Alive. Mean as ever. Evan let out a breath that almost became a laugh. Then he looked down. And Troy. Mercer leaned against the frame. Dead. Evan shut his eyes. The grief of that was twisted, full of rage and disgust and responsibility, but it was grief all the same. I can't take it back, he said. Mercer nodded. No. You think the judge'll bury me to make an example? Probably try. Mercer folded his arms. But examples get complicated when the whole county just watched the backdrop catch fire. Your lawyer's already talking manslaughter argument, coercion context, emotional disturbance, federal misconduct, all the mess. You're still in trouble, Evan. Serious trouble. Evan opened his eyes again. I know. Mercer studied him. Knowing is a start. At midnight, after the reporters were pushed back, and the first round of statements spun out into the country like sparks on dry grass, Hank went alone to the edge of the north field. He stood where his mother must have stood, in 1979. Blankets in her arms, not knowing the future had just shifted under her hand. The sealed package reflected moonlight with dull indifference. You took enough, Hank said softly. To it, or to the dead, or maybe to history itself. That's all you get. There was no answer, only crickets, and distant generators, and the tired creak of the porch swing behind him. When he turned back toward the house, Emily was standing in the doorway. He walked to her, and for a second they both looked at the dark windows of the kitchen, expecting maybe some impossible light, some final sign. But the house was only their house. Worn, imperfect, full of grief, still standing. Emily slipped her hand into his. You think Grandma heard it all these years? She asked. Hank looked out at the field, then back at the porch where life would have to continue in the shape it still had. Maybe, he said. Or maybe she just knew some things should never belong to one family alone. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. Sirens sounded faintly from town, not urgent now, just part of the restless machinery of aftermath. Tomorrow there would be hearings and cameras and men in suits building new lies out of the old ones. Evan would wake in a cell. Mercer would fight for room to tell the truth without losing his badge. Voss would carry this failure upward into a system that punished honesty with committees. The farm might be fenced off. Pine Ridge might become famous for all the wrong reasons. None of it was fair. None of it was clean. And yet in the dark, with the field silent and the missing house gone, the family could at least see the shape of what remained. Not peace. Never that. Just the harder mercy of no longer being buried.